Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Today I'm going to be taking a look at Goodman Games' Original Adventures Reincarnated Volume 2, The Isle of Dread. So this is the second in the Original Adventures Reincarnated series, which takes classic modules from D&D's past, reprints them in their original versions, as well as providing 5th edition or current version D&D conversions so that new players or new dungeon masters can experience these classic modules. The first version or the first installment of this series was the Into the Borderlands book, which had both modules B1 and B2, In Search of the Unknown and Keep on the Borderlands, and those were sort of your traditional dungeon crawl type of adventures. Type of modules. Now, Keep on the Borderlands is arguably one of the most iconic modules ever created, and for good reason, but at the end of the day, it's still sort of your typical dungeon crawl. There's enough about it that's sort of unique, or a lot of people experienced it as one of their first adventures, which I think is why so many people look back on it fondly. But at its core, that's sort of what that was. The Isle of Dread, however, is sort of monumental for a couple of different reasons that we're going to get into here. So, first of all, like the other Goodman Games Original Adventures Reincarnated, they do have sort of a similar format that they use for their products. So the first part is going to be an introduction section, which will have a foreword as well as some essays by individuals that may have worked for TSR, or in this case, the introduction or the foreword was actually written by David Zeb Cook, who was one of the two designers to work on the Isle of Dread, the other being Tom Moldvay. Unfortunately, though, Mr. Moldvay is no longer with us, but we do have David Zeb Cook here to sort of give you some insight as to what went into designing this module. Then you have, again, other essays from people that may have worked for TSR or individuals that work for Goodman Games at this point in time, as well as a proper interview with David Zeb Cook in here as well. So again, this first section here is a really fantastic read, and for me, I really enjoy this because I'm really interested in the history of the Dungeons & Dragons brand. I like going back and learning the history and the development and some of the changes or some of the ideas that were going on at the time. So for me, this is actually one of my favorite sections of the book, and it's always amazing to sort of hear straight from the designers or people that were heavily involved in the development to sort of get their insights and what inspired them to make this adventure, which is an interesting one to say the very least. Then we have the original printings of the modules in their initial rule set included here. So you have two printings of the Isle of Dread from, I think the second one is the fourth printing for sure, and the first one, it doesn't tell you exactly which one it is, but I believe the general consensus is that it's the second or third printing. It also gives you a little bit of information on some of the changes that occurred from the different printings as well. So things like, in this case, the product code, I think, was initially incorrect. They used the product code for Keep on the Borderlands, so that was fixed. All rights reserved information, I think it was duplicated at one point. And then the fourth printing was actually drastically different. And then we have the actual modules themselves here. So this is the earlier printing. It's designed for levels 3 through 7 because the adventure or the expert rule set was designed for characters after the basic rule set. So the basic rules was levels 1 through 3. So this takes characters after that all the way up through to possibly to the expert rules went all the way to, I think, 14th level, 14th or 17th. I can't remember exactly. But it was somewhere in that range, and this is a module for characters levels 3 through 7. So what's fantastic about this adventure, and what's so sort of iconic, and I think what's so memorable about it, is that this was one of, if not the first printed, published module that was designed around wilderness exploration and not just dungeon crawling. So that was actually a pretty big thing back then, because all the other modules were your dungeon crawls. They were sort of just taking place in the dungeon. They may give you like a base of operations to work with, like Keep on the Borderlands did, as well as a little bit of surrounding area information. But for the most part, the bulk of the adventure took place within a sort of a dungeon setting, or in this case, like the Caves of Chaos kind of thing. So this here actually gives you a large island to explore. The player characters, at the end of one of their previous adventures, stumbles across a cache of scrolls, which aren't spell scrolls, but some of them are logs from the captain or an explorer by the name of Rory Barbosa. That describes this island in some detail, and the idea is that the player characters are intrigued and they go to explore. So they have an incomplete map that they can use, which looks like this here on the back, and it's a hex crawl, so you can actually fill it in as you go through, and it's always fun to see stuff like that. And there are a ton of really interesting wilderness encounters here. My favorite of which has to be, just from what I've read so far, has to be the deranged Ankylosaurus, which is, the Ankylosaurus is like the quadruped dinosaur with like the club tail. And in this one, even though they're normally docile herbivores, he ate a batch of what's called loco weed, and it's caused him to go a little bit insane. So he just goes on this like tail bashing rampage, which I think is just, I don't know, there's just something charming about that. There's also a green dragon layer here. There's troglodytes, there's a Neanderthal layer, gargoyles, there's a roc's roost. So there's a lot of stuff to explore here, and a lot of information to fill out on your maps. And sort of near the center of the island is this pyramid, which is where the second part of the adventure takes place, which is more of a traditional dungeon crawl, where the characters are going through this pyramid that is inhabited by an evil race of aquatic creatures known as the Kopru or Korporu. So yeah, and it's just dealing with them and trying to prevent their plots from going down. So that was one of the more interesting things about this, is that it combined it had your traditional dungeon crawl, but it was also one of the first modules to have a heavy focus and emphasis on wilderness exploration. This was also the module that initially introduced, at least in print form, in a commercial sense, the land of the world of Mystara. So this has the known world, including, so it actually comes with a little bit of a brief write-up on some of the areas like Karamakos, the Republic of Dorican, the Principles of Glantry. So this is sort of where the Mystara setting was first introduced, again, at least in print form. This was something I think was part of people's home game prior, but this was its first introduction in terms of a printed commercial product. And that is also, Mystara is another one of those classic settings that is linked to the D&D basic rule set, and a lot of people have very fond memories of it, and this is where it started, and it's really awesome to see that. There's also some different maps included here that you can use, including some settlements that you can come across for like the Phanatons, which are sort of like this like a monkey type race, like a primate type race that has like these membranous wings. And then there's, or sorry, I think the Phanatons might be the cat folk. There's cat folk, and then there's this sort of like weird monkey type of race. But anyway, it's just, again, really cool stuff. And then we get into the dungeon crawl here as well. So again, really important stuff as far as the exploration, the hex crawling, and the Mystara setting. So then we get to the second inclusion of the printing here. Now, I know I said in the previous installment in this series, when I looked at Into the Unknown, Into the Unknown, I think it was, or Into the Borderlands, sorry, that I wasn't a fan of including two printings of both of those modules. I felt at the time it seemed a little excessive. But for this issue, for this installment, I think it actually works really well, because the difference between the two printings that they show here are much more drastic, just in terms of the layout, the way everything's designed. It's the two look very different. You have new artwork. For example, here's an example of like the handout that you can use. with the Rory Barbosa, like the entry logs that he has, the scrolls, but it also has like just more columns of text, different artwork, so it's laid out very differently. So the two look drastically different, and it's nice to see that because you can easily spot the difference between the two of them. So I like that's one of the things that in this situation I honestly feel that it actually is a strong point, or one of the better parts of this book, to have the two different printings versus the Into the Borderlands one, which felt just a little too redundant because they really weren't that different when you were comparing them. But this one is again, they are very, very different. And there you see like the Copperoo, which is sort of this like fish-like creature that has sort of the like the elithid kind of like tentacles around their mouths. But again, this is just a different printing of that module, but it's laid out very, very differently. And I love it. There's also a pronunciation guide, which is great because I suck at pronouncing things, and people get really, really particular about how their made-up fantasy words are pronounced for reasons that I honestly can't quite fully understand. But here we have the pronunciation guide, so it's you have the definitive way, and this is from the people that actually designed it themselves. So I'm a little more inclined to believe this than say a modern one that's trying to put their spin on pronunciation of names that are like 30 years old, kind of thing. But anyway, so those were the printings, and then of course we have the 5th edition conversion information, which takes up pretty much the rest of the book. So we're at page 92, and we're getting into the 5th edition stuff here. So of course we have all the information for dungeon masters to sort of familiarize themselves with the world, so the Mystara world, or the known world. As well as sort of the write-ups, and it gets into, again, other DM information like preparation, designing encounters, and things along those lines. You got the encounter charts, some of the different things here, and it's just overall it's a great conversion. Also, with the 5th edition conversions, which I think is going to be a mainstay of this series. All of the 5th edition conversions have expanded material. So in this case, in the original printings, there were several other side scenarios that they mention, but they never really fleshed out. They just sort of gave you an idea of some of the things that you could incorporate, that you could put into your adventure if you wanted to, if the players wanted to do more in that area. So it gave you that stuff, but here it actually expands them and gives them more. It actually fully fleshes them out, which is kind of nice. So it gives you like full maps of some of these areas instead of just giving you like the generic maps that the original ones had. So again, it's just a really nice touch that they would have these additions in here. And it helps really, again, expand the module. So what's great about this one, so here we have the further adventures here. So it actually, again, stats everything out for you. I think this one also, the 5th edition version puts it, I think, back in the elemental plane of water, but it can shift between worlds and stuff like that. That's sort of a later development. I honestly kind of prefer it to be just part of like a lost portion of a regular material world setting, but they've expanded and they've had their stories over the years, so I think it's just a way of maintaining continuity with that. We also have new monsters included here for 5th edition, including the Eye of the Deep, which is a Beholderkin, and I love it. So we got a whole bunch of creatures in here. And then we get new magic items and spells, and we got some characters and NPCs that you can use. So just a lot of really great information here overall. And we got the maps and some of the art concept stuff. So there you go. This does retail again for $49.99 US. Now I only paid $60 Canadian for it, which again is cheaper than other 5th edition adventures or product books that they've come out with. And the fact that Over 200 pages are dedicated to the 5th edition version of this adventure. I think it's one of those things that a lot of people are really hung up on the price for it, because it's just a module or something like that, and they were only $10 back in the day or whatever. So to be charging this price now, and I sort of understand that, but truthfully, I think that these books are hugely worth it. I mean, I was happy to pay $60 for these books, because I think I would get more use out of these than some of the more modern D&D adventures. And again, the 5th edition portions of both of these, both the ones I've talked about so far, are around 200 pages, which is about the same size as a standard 5th edition book. But with these, you get to actually go back and explore some of the more iconic modules from D&D's history. And I think that's one of the charms of this, and this is a great way for newer players to be able to experience these and be able to do it with the 5th edition rule set, which is something I mentioned in the other video as well. Overall, I think that this is actually a really solid book. I've seen sort of mixed feelings about this one. Some people think it's one of the better ones, some people think it's one of the weaker ones. I think that this is actually a really solid product. It doesn't do anything super wild with the 5th edition conversion, but it gives you a very solid adventure. It does the hex crawling, the wilderness exploration, which is always fun stuff to do. And I would say that the Isle of Dread, honestly, I think does it a little bit better than, say, Tomb of Annihilation, which is a more modern 5th edition adventure that also combines hex crawling with a dungeon complex to explore at the end. I just think that this one does a better job of it. It's a little more digestible, and with this version over, say, Tomb of Annihilation, you really are free to explore, and you're not under a time crunch of this curse that's affecting the multiverse. So I think that this is just a better, if you want to do a wilderness exploration adventure, then I think this is one of the best ones that you could get, especially with the new 5th edition conversion. Also included, because again, with the original module, it did include some campaign information about the known world, or in this case, Mystara. And so with this one, you're also getting a sort of a micro campaign setting as well, but that's still an awesome inclusion here. So you're getting a really pretty decent sample of the history of the D&D game. You get one of their more classic, well-loved and well-regarded campaign settings, at least the bare bones information on it. And you're also getting a really pivotal module as well, which combines hex crawling, wilderness exploration, pioneering, whatever you want to call it, with a traditional dungeon crawl at the end. So overall, honestly, I recommend this. I know, like I said, price might be a little bit of a snagging point for some people, and if I were to have paid the near $80 that the conversion from US to Canadian would likely have put this at, or should have put this at, then I would agree with you. I wouldn't want to pay that much money for it, but I got this for $10 more than the US cover price, and I feel that that is a perfectly justified price for the information contained within. And obviously, my opinion is just that. Not everyone's going to share it, but I think that you should try to approach this with an open mind, because you are getting, again, a similar sized 5th edition book to what the more modern ones are, but you also get some history stuff included in there as well. So I think it's fantastic from both those perspectives, and I'm really glad that I had this one. This was actually the one originally that I wanted the least, but it's kind of the two now. It's kind of my favorite of the two that I've looked at least at this point in time. Again, I think it does a better job of justifying the inclusion of the two versions of the original module, because they are two drastically different looking versions. And for me, I like seeing that change. I like seeing those differences, and it highlights the differences between the printings in this version, in my opinion, better than the differences in the printings of B1 and B2 that were included in the last book, although I think that was a good one as well. So I do recommend checking this out, especially if you can get it for less than full retail. Then I think it's pretty much a slam dunk. So anyway, those are my thoughts on the Isle of Dread. Let me know in the comments below, what are some of your favorite experiences on this island, or did you play, like, if you didn't play the original, maybe did you play the Savage Tide Adventure Path from 3rd edition Dungeon Magazine, or 3.5 Dungeon Magazine, or some of the other adventures that took place there. I'd love to know what your experiences are, your thoughts are, and if you have this book as well, let me know in the comments what you think of the book itself. I'm really happy with it. I'm glad that I have it, and I'm looking forward to looking at the next book in this series, which is Volume 3, The Expedition to the Barrier Peaks. Anyway, thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Take care.